So today I wanted to kind of do a response video. Adrian from Kiwi's Crochet Corner is starting to knit, so I decided to do a video and help her learn how to cast on with a stretchy cast on. Her goal is to make a sock using the magic loop method, so I'm going to show you how to do the magic loop method with a 24-inch cable. Many people do not recommend doing a magic loop with a 24-inch cable. So I'm going to use this bulky yarn just to show how to do it with a larger size yarn. Okay, where's my tail end? Oh no. Okay, so I'm using a, where is it? Choosing a different yarn because something bad happened. I don't want to talk about it. I'm just going to change the subject. Alright, so same weight yarn. Oh my gosh. Okay, I almost panicked a little. There were a few questions she had. She asked about the anatomy of a stitch, how to cast on, and how to do the magic loop so that she could do a sock. So that's what I'm going to show you. First, I'm going to show you the long tail cast on. So for the long tail cast on, the trick is that you're going to triple up your yarn for the width that you want. So let's say you're making a sock, and I know that a sock is about as wide as my wrist, right? So I'm going to take my first strand and I'm going to make it as wide as my wrist with a little bit of give. It's like that. So this is how long my first part of my tail is, and I'll measure that. 9 inches. So I'm going to triple that up. I'm going to fold it over once and then twice. And that's a tripled up strand of yarn. And then I'm going to pinch it here and start with a slip knot. And that's my first part of the long tail cast on, is I need a long tail. And it has to be triple the length of what I'm making. So now I'm going to cast on, and I'm going to make a tube sock with this. So I already started my tube sock and I just took it off my needles. But this is 20 stitches for my size. And if you're trying to make a smaller sock with this weight of yarn and this needle size, which is an 8mm US 11, then you would cast on 20 for a size 7, 8. For a size 5, 6, you would do 18, and for a size 9, 10, you would do 22. And I'm doing a 1x1 ribbing, which means I'm knitting one and purling one, like this. So that's what I'm going to do. This is how you do a long tail. I'm putting my slip knot on my needle with the tail end facing me and the working yarn facing away. And what you want to do is you want to take your fingers like a little beak, put them underneath in the center, and then wrap your 3 fingers up here, well, 2 fingers, and wrap them around and grab the tail and the working yarn. So you open your fingers like this, and we're going to do this motion to cast on. So we're going to use our finger to hold this stitch or slip knot. It's also a stitch. It's our first stitch, so this counts as 1 stitch. And what we're going to do is turn our hand like this, and we're going to scoop from left to right, and we're going to create a loop that looks like an X. So we go scoop and pick up that loop. Then we're going to turn our hand, and we're going to scoop from right to left, and we're going to pick up the working yarn like this. And then we're going to turn our hand, and this motion is going to pull the working yarn through this loop, and it's going to create a stitch. So this is the stitch we just created. See? Stitch. So we have 2 stitches, but we have to drop our thumb out of this loop, and I'm holding it secure with my other finger, and we're going to use our thumb to tighten the strand of yarn, which is the tail end. And that's you casting on. Just make sure it's not super tight, because you want to be able to go into those stitches later on when you are working. And I'm showing you this with a large yarn and a large needle because it's easier to see. So let's do that again. So we're going to turn our hand, finger gun, pow pow. Turn your hand from left to right. We're going to scoop, creating a loop, or it looks kind of like half of a knot. And then we're going to turn our hand. Once that's on there, we're going to scoop from right to left, and we're going to turn our hand again. And that's going to create that stitch. And we're going to use our thumb to pull the tail end, but not too tight, because then you won't be able to work into that when you go into the stitch later. So you see the bottom, these are the little knots I'm making when I use this hand, and on the top you have the working yarn loop. So I'm going to relax my hand, and I'm going to turn my hand and just keep casting on, making that X, turning my hand, wrapping it around, turning my hand, and that's 1 more stitch. So we have 4 stitches, and they should be moving around like this. If it's too tight and it won't move around, it'll be hard to grab up when you're actually knitting. So you want to be able to move it like that. And we're going to keep casting on. We're turning our hand left to right, pulling that loop up, turning our hand right to left, scooping it, then turning our hand right there. Now we're doing it again. So I'm going to cast on 20 because I'm making some slippers. And it's all the motions happening over here. It's like autopilot. After getting used to it, it just happens automatically. Scoop. So I'm going to keep casting on, and then when I have 20, I'll start talking again, and then I'll show you how to knit and purl. Because the pattern that you're working with, Adrienne, is a ribbed cuff. I believe. So I'm talking directly to her because this video is dedicated to Adrienne from Kiwi's Crochet Corner. And if you would like me to answer any super specific questions, leave a comment. I feel so weird. But yeah, just gonna keep casting on. It's so relaxing. You gotta move them down because they'll build up in the tip. I have one more to go. So this is my 20th. Cast it on and see my little tail. So that's how I know my little tripled up trick works. But it's better to have like longer tail than a shorter tail. Because you can't add, you have to, you know what I mean, right? Because you need this tail to cast on with. It's what makes these little knots on the bottom. This is what they look like on the bottom from the tail. And then this is the loop from the working yarn. Okay, so you wanted to learn the magic loop. So that means first you have to get your stitches down away from the working, or away from this needle. And then what I was doing is I was taking about half of these stitches and turning my cable, and then I'm going to put my stitches that don't have my tail and my working yarn, and I'm going to pull some of these stitches. So what I did was, it was on the straight needle up here. I pulled it down the cable, right? And I took half of my stitches, so that's like 10, 10. And I took them and I opened them, and then I'm bending my cable, but not like too much to like ruin my cable. But I don't know if that would happen with these. I don't know, they're pretty cheap. They're those Temu ones from Wish, because they're the same thing. But so I bent it and I'm pulling the cable that has my first stitch that I made. So this is my slip knot stitch, my first stitch that I ever made, and that is the cable I'm pulling. The stitches, that's the needle I'm pulling my stitches toward. If that makes sense. So I'm just, yeah, pulling it onto here because I need these stitches up here because I'm going to work in the round. Ideally, when you're working in a panel, you're just going to flip and then work from this side. But since we're working in the round, that's where we need our stitches to be. So my stitches are up here. My other stitches are here. And see, we have it kind of in a V. V for victory. So now it's like this. Now I'm going to pull my other needle with the side where the working yarn is, and I'm going to pull it out and up. But I want to leave a little bit of a bend right here, so this is like a magic loop. And I also want to keep in mind that our stitches need to be facing the same direction. Just like with crochet, when you're doing a long chain and joining it and you want your stitches to be laying in the same direction, it's the same thing with knitting. So you want those little knots to be facing down, or facing out, or it just needs to be in the same direction. And we're keeping this kind of close together so that we don't get that weird like this where it's like a long string where it's like becoming super tight there. Okay. So yeah, stitches facing the same direction. We have our little magic loop, and we have this long piece of cable with our needle so that we can pick up these stitches onto this needle. So what we're going to do is, I like to have my needle kind of going around and into my grip, making sure you're not using your tail end to knit with. You can just tuck it that way. So I knit with the yarn in my left hand because I crochet, and that's how I naturally hold my yarn usually. Not usually, all the time. So that's how I set my knitting up. Just grabbing some extra. I think that might be the most comfortable for you, but time will tell. So because I'm going to be transferring and working in the round, the yarn is going to be, this is my working end, this is my beginning, and we're joining. And I'm going to do a knit stitch to join. Also, this tail will always mark your beginning of round. So if you ever lose a stitch marker, just know this is a good stitch marker. It'll tell you where the beginning of your round is. But anyways, so I'm going to knit. Knitting depends. Okay, so there's the knit stitch and then there's the purl stitch. With the knit stitch, the yarn needs to be behind the left needle. If you are a left knitter, like, okay, so the knit stitch, the needle is going to be behind or in the back of this needle. Okay, if you're purling, you would bring the yarn to the front. Those are the two differences, and also where you place this needle. So you're going to put your yarn behind. I'm just going to grab my yarn like this for right now. And you're going to insert your needle, this empty one, kind of like you would do a Tunisian stitch. You place it like that inside, and this needle will be behind. And this is how the stitch looks when you open it like that. The anatomy of your stitch, which is something you asked about, Adrian, is the stitch consists of legs. So this is the front leg, and then this is the back leg. And you're going through the front leg and in between both legs. And the legs kind of sit, like this over the needle. So you're inserting in the middle, kind of like when you do a knit stitch with Tunisian crochet, like I said. And then you're going to yarn over from left to right, like that. And you can use this finger to kind of hold it, and you're going to pull the working yarn from the skein through, and that's your first knit stitch. And it's also your join. You can pull the tail end to secure it a little, or like you have to pull it to kind of tighten it so that you don't have this weird long string or strand of yarn. So just pull it a little tight for the first stitch. Now we're going to do a purl. So we're going to bring the yarn through, like in between these two needles and forward. So it's forward. And now where you place your needle, you're going to go forward. Before you were putting it like this, that's the knit stitch. But for the purl stitch, you're going to bring it like this. And it's going to be in front of your left needle. And then you're going to wrap it around from the right to the left. Because if you wrap it around like this, the stitch is going to turn on you on the other side. So you want to go the opposite direction, which is from right to left. And then you pull that through, and that's your purl stitch. So you're doing a purl, a knit, and a purl for your knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. So it's going to look like this, or like this when you do it with a smaller yarn. Alright, I'm going to do that again. So we just purled and our yarn is in front, and we just made this bump right here. That's indicating it's a purl stitch. When I get more stitches on the needle, I'll show you what I'm talking about. It'll make more sense. So I'm taking the yarn that's in front and I'm putting it in back again because we're going to knit, do a knit stitch. The yarn's in back, my hook comes forward, and it goes in between the stitches, or in between the legs of the stitch, and I'm going to have it placed behind. So it's like this one's in the front, this one's behind, and I'm going to wrap it around from left to the right and pull it through. I like to think of this as kind of like the single crochet, or like when you slip stitch with crochet, you're putting your hook in the stitch, you're wrapping the yarn around, and you're pulling it through. It's the same concept, to kind of simplify that. So I just did the knit stitch, and I want you to look at the stitches next to each other. So anatomy of stitch. The purl stitch will have this bump horizontal line, and that's how you know it's a purl stitch. And the knit stitch will have this V right here. It looks like a V. So if you look at if you look at the sample I made, you have the V, these little V's right here, that's the knit stitch. But if you were to turn it the other side, you see these horizontal bars. That's technically it would be a purl stitch. And if I pull this apart, you can see the little bars right here. They're horizontal. That would indicate a purl stitch. So I'm going to continue. I have my purl, because you see that little horizontal line is the purl. And then these little V's right here is a knit stitch. But I need to do a purl. So what do? I bring my yarn forward into the front. I insert my needle in the front, so front, and I'm going right on, I start on the right side and I go left, and I'm wrapping it around. And this tension on my left side, my left hand, my tension pulls down so that I could pull this stitch through. That's what gives you the ability to pull this yarn through the loop on the needle to make the stitch. I made the stitch, I'm taking my needle out on my left needle and I'm taking it off, and I placed it on here. So now I did a purl, now I need to do a knit stitch. So I'm taking my yarn from the front and I'm putting it in the back. And I'm inserting my right needle into the loop stitch on my left needle into the back, wrapping around from the left to the right and using this hand to hold the tension to pull it through. I'll show you this with my other hand right now. So say I'm using this hand. You want to have some type of tension. So I just did a knit stitch. I need to do a purl stitch because we're doing a knit, purl, knit, purl. So I bring my yarn to the front, insert my needle in the front leg in the front, wrap my yarn from the right to the left, and then I'm pulling, see how it pulls that working yarn through, and I'm pulling it through to make a knit purl stitch. And then I'm dropping this off. Once this is on this needle, you can drop it off. And now I need to do a knit stitch again. So we're taking the yarn to the back for the knit stitch, inserting in the front leg in between the stitch to the back, wrapping it around left to right, using this hand to pull the tension of it, but not too tight because you don't want it to be too tense. Sometimes I push it in and then you're pulling it through with the other needle and onto this needle. Now that it's on here, you can take this needle out and drop it off. So you're doing a purl stitch. This was a knit stitch. Now we're doing a purl stitch. So you're taking the yarn forward. You're inserting it in the front. You're wrapping the yarn to the right, or you put it like this, go around. And once you're pulling this, this kind of pulls the yarn. And we're pulling it through. Taking it off. Wrapping it around to the back because we're doing a knit stitch. Inserting in between, push through, wrapping it around left. We're going around left because I'm bringing my hand left, pulling it down, and then allowing this tension to pull it, and your hand can also, like, see, it looks like that on the other side. You're pulling it through. Now it's over here. So it's on this needle. We're going to take it off. And that was a knit stitch. Now we're going to purl. So we bring it to the front to purl. Front needle to the front. Wrapping it around, going from the right side to the left side. Okay, now I have no more stitches on this left needle. So what do? Well, I turn it with the loop facing me. That's the tail end. And you want these stitches that are down here because this is these are your working yarn, right? You want to pull these stitches. We're going to pull the stitches that are not worked yet. We're going to pull it toward the left needle. And it's important to just use your other hand to push it up. Wiggle, wiggle, I guess. That's good. Now we're going to pull. We're going to use our hand to hold these stitches, and I'm going to pull this needle up, and it's going to make, take this tail out of there, it's going to make another loop. So we're making this loop right here, and this is the needle we're going to use to work the stitches off onto from this needle, and this is where the working yarn is now. So we're continuing with what we're doing. Move these stitches up a little more, and then pull this little loop. Magic loop. Magic. You're a wizard, Harry. Anyways, so let's look at let's untangle ourselves. Let's look at these stitches over here, because we just interrupted what we were doing and we want to look at the stitches. So what can I tell by where the stitches are and what they are and what I need to do next? Well, this yarn being in front tells me that this is a purl stitch, and looking at my stitches, I see vertical bars. One's right here, that's a purl. That means this is a knit stitch, and it has this V right here. This is a purl stitch because it has that horizontal. I meant horizontal, I said vertical. This has a horizontal bar. That means it's a purl stitch, which means this is a knit stitch, and you can tell because there's these two vertical lines, vertical bars or legs that form a V later on when they're added to. That's a knit stitch. And then we turn, or we move down, and this is a horizontal line right here. That means it's a purl stitch. Another giveaway is the yarn is in front, which means it's a purl stitch. So this is the working yarn. That's good to know. The working yarn, if you're a right-handed knitter, will always be on your right hand side. And I'm going to use my left hand to knit now, because that's my most comfortable way. You also see here you have this piece of, or this little yarn pulling the stitch over here. It's easy to just pull this stitch back and it tightens. And if that gets too crazy long, you just pull some of the loop out, and you can hold it like this with your hand, and it'll like lessen the stress on that. Because with thinner yarn, it'll be kind of tighter actually. Alright, so my left needle has my stitches that I want to work off, and my right needle has my working yarn. So I'm going to do my little tension trick. And like I said, this was a purl stitch, so it's in the front, but I want to do a knit stitch because we're doing a knit 1 purl 1 ribbing. So I'm taking my yarn and putting it behind. And now I'm going to put my needle that's empty into my stitch as I would do if I were knitting, because I am, with it behind. I'm wrapping it around left to right, and then I'm pulling, I'm putting that through like that, and I'm taking it off. Now I'm doing a purl stitch. I like to do this because it gives it more tension when I'm knitting. So my purl stitch, I put my needle in front, wrap around from right to left, and then I can pull this back down and purl. I'm showing you different ways to purl a stitch with your hands. This is the picking method, I believe, and the other one's the throwing method. So there's different methods or ways to do it. So that's a purl. This I feel makes it easier. So we're going to knit. So we're going to take the yarn, bring it to the back with our hands over the needle, dancing, and we're going to knit. Insert needle behind, left to right, and we're going to pull it through. I think for a beginner, using the right hand might be easier for tension, so that's what I'm going to stick with. You'll develop your own technique when you're knitting, when you learn to knit, when you're learning more. What am I trying to say? When you get more in depth in the knitting, you're going to develop your own technique. But just like when you're doing a knife hold in crochet and a pencil hold, it's two different ways you're holding your yarn and throwing it or putting it around the needle. And you'll hear people talk about that. So I'm going to put my yarn in front because I'm doing a purl. And it's important to keep your loops close to the ends of your needles without throwing them off, if that makes sense. Because if I'm too close, it's going to fall off and I'm going to drop a stitch, and that would be not fun for a beginner, because then you have to learn how to pick your stitches up. But Lord have mercy, let's not do that right now. So I am purling. When I purl, I'm in the front. When I purl, I go around from the right to the left. Excuse me. Pull it through. Drop it off. I'm knitting. Put it to the back. Insert hook in the front to the back. Left to right. Drop it off. Bring it to the front. Bring it to the front. Right to left. Pull it down. Pull it through. So you have to decide which is the easiest for you, and I think using the yarn on this side is easiest. When I started, that's what I was doing. As I got more comfortable knitting, I started working my yarn on this side, and it changes how you put the yarn through the needles. And like I said earlier, this is inconsequential. You'll be able to tighten this when you go into the last stitch. Alright, so we're knitting and we're putting it through. And this is the magic loop method and the purl and knit stitch. I think once you get the hang of it, there are going to be different things that a person teaching you how to make a sock will talk about. And honestly, if you have questions, Adrienne, just like I've made a sock before, so I can help. So this is the last stitch on this needle. And it's a purl, so I'm going to wrap around and go through the front of the leg and wrap it around right to left and then pull it through, and then it comes off. So you see this long strand, and that's kind of scary, but it will tighten, don't worry. I'm going to show you this again, the knit and the purl. But yeah, so I want to show you what to do. So we know that the working yarn is always on the right side if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, it's going to be on the left side, but that's not my expertise. I don't know. So it's on the right side. So I need to move these unworked stitches up here. because I just did one round of knit and purl. And how do I know this? My tail is over here. This is my little tail that is kind of my stitch marker. So I'm just gonna like knot that because it kind of gets in the way sometimes. But this is my little tail. You don't have to do all that. But I'm gonna move my stitches up because I want to work these again. So I'm doing a second round. And then when I get more rounds, I'll be able to show you how to tell how many rounds you actually have. And I like this, the use of like larger yarn, because you can actually see the rows or the rounds. Alright, so my working yarn is up here. I just moved my unworked stitches to my left needle. I need some more slack, so I'm moving my right needle up so that I can create my magic loop. And I actually want to bring my working yarn in front of my needle because if it doesn't get brought to the front, it's going to get all tangly for right now. So this is what it looks like. Okay. This is the stitch that's being pulled to create that tension. So you just pull that stitch a little tight, and you could pull this one to kind of fix that later. See how it tightened it? Because all of this is actually connected to each other. So if I pull this stitch gets tight. And if I pull this over here, this kind of tightens. Do you see that? So it's kind of nice to know that when you're first starting out, is like what pulls with what. That way you can kind of tighten that. So it's not like a loose, crazy amount of yarn that's kind of scaring you. See, it's a little tight now. If I were to pull it, it would be re-loosened. So yeah, everything pulls. So I'm going to just tighten that up so you can see. Because that's one of the questions you had with your video is, help, how do we tighten this? Alright, so we're going to reorient ourselves. I know by looking at this mess of loops that I purled. The last thing I did was purl because I look at my vertical bars right here. I look at my vertical bars in my knit stitch, 2 vertical bars, and I look at my horizontal bar here for my purl stitch, and my yarn is in the front, so I know I just purled. What does that mean? Take this around like that. See how it's kind of curving, but that means that I need to knit, so I need to put my yarn behind. And we remember what the knit stitch is the yarn's behind and you're going through and you're wrapping around left to right and you're doing it like that. Now we have 2 rows of a knit stitch. This is the foundation of our cast on. This vertical bar, right, these 2 vertical bars. This is my second round. And then the stitch that's on my needle is my second. So this is my foundation cast on. This is round 1. And then this is round 2. So you have 3. We have 3 like looking knit stitches, but it's actually only 2 rounds. And I think that's kind of helpful because I struggled for a long time to know how to count my rounds when looking at my stitches. That's why I said that. So I'm going to bring my yarn into the front because we're doing a purl. and I'll just pinch it here for right now. I'm inserting in the front, and then I'm wrapping it around, and I'm using this hand to pull down the yarn onto the needle, and then I'm using the needle to pull the yarn through to make that loop for the purl stitch, which is this horizontal bar. Now I'm doing a knit, so I'm taking the yarn and pulling it through to the back. And I'm going to insert to the back, wrap around, and pull up a loop. Pull my yarn to the front to do a purl. I always want to just do like that. Insert to the front, wrap around, right side, left side, and then pull it down. Or if you use this hand, which for me is not natural, we're doing a knit stitch, we're taking the yarn back, inserting through, wrapping around left, right, pulling it through, taking it off. And now you see the ribbing forming. So you see the bees and the pearls, horizontal, vertical. I think that's the best way to tell these two stitches apart. Wrap it to the front, insert in the front, yarn it around, right to left, put it to the back, insert through, right to left, or left to right, we're pulling it to the front, in the front, right side to the left. Pull it to the back to knit, insert, left, bringing it to the left, taking it to the right. Take it to the front, insert in the front, right, you start on the right, and you pull it around to the left. Now you need to pull the magic loop through, and you need to rearrange the stitches. So we're pulling these stitches to the top of the empty needle, and we're taking the full needle on the right and we're pulling that up, right, to give us, make sure this isn't all twisted because it just makes it really uncomfortable to do. We're taking our yarn, we're going to move our yarn to the left side because, yeah, it just makes it less chaotic. Alright, so we just did a purl stitch, and how do I know? And just look at the stitches. We have these vertical lines and this horizontal line, so that's how we know we did a purl. And the yarn is in front. I only say this because when you're going on to the next needle, it's kind of like, it can be kind of hectic and chaotic when you're first starting to know what the stitches look like just by themselves. So I'm just gonna put my yarn behind. I'm gonna insert my hook or my needle into the back. And I'm using my left hand now to show you the other way to do it. And I am wrapping it. And a lot of tension goes into just pulling it while you're doing that. These are just two different ways of folding the yarn. I'm pulling it down. Pulling it around. My preferred way, I think it's continental or English, I don't even know. This is picking. So I'm just knitting. Now I'm purling. Knitting. Purling. Take it to the back, insert, knitting, purl. Take that off. Insert, knitting, see, it's kind of being difficult, so I use my hand. Bring it to the front. Purl. And drop it off. So this is another round complete because we have our tail here to tell me we just finished. So, I mean, I hope that helps. For this sample, I did 4 rounds of knit and purl ribbing, and then I just knit in the round, and that's what a sock would have you, that's what a sock pattern would have you do, is they would have you do the cuff because you're wanting to do a sock. And I'm speaking directly to Adrian right now. And you guys, because I'm gonna actually, I'll link Adrian and I'll link the pattern she's following for the sock. But for a sock, they would have you do the cuff, which my cuff is little. Then they would have you do the leg, which is the part that touches your calf, or not your calf. Wait, yeah, your calf, to your ankle. And then they would have you do the heel, turn. It's like, as you're doing her pattern, you can just ask questions and I'll let you know. But I just showed you how to do a cuff, technically. Once you get to the leg, you're going to continue doing exactly what I just showed you, but you're just doing a knit stitch. Do you see the difference between the stitches? Is you have this little cuff because it's a knit and a purl, knit, purl. And it's very stretchy. And then when you're just doing the knit stitch, it's actually way less stretchy. But the knit stitch will just give you these little V's. See that? The little V's? And that's the knit stitch. I'll show you it in a bigger version. So, I don't know. I hope that helped you. And I am going to edit this video. I edited a video that was like 35 minutes long and realized that I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't want to talk about that. So this is the video I am going to upload. And the video, the original video I made, you can hardly hear me talking in it. And I think it's because the heater kept going off. But anyways, I hope this helped you. And if you have any more questions, please let me know. And if this wasn't helpful, please let me know. Because that's helpful to me. If you're like, what are you even talking about, Crystal? That helps me to know I should never do this again. Alright, thank you for watching. Goodbye.